These are the words from Philippians.
Thanks, Mel. It is, of course, Palm Sunday. I apologise that I let the team down a bit and I didn't get very many palms. We will rectify that in the future, next Palm Sunday. But we're not looking at the Palm Sunday passage, and that might be why it threw me a little bit, because Paul writes in the letter to the Philippians this little section which the scholars seem to think might be a Christian hymn, a very early Christian hymn, because of the way the words are expressed, and it's not quite the same kind of cadence and language that Paul normally uses, and it's quite poetic. So you're probably aware there's loads of different kinds of literature in the Bible. You know, we have everything from really ancient myths telling stories of things that happened before there were people on the earth, through to genealogies and histories, letters, poetry, proverbs, songs, all sorts of stuff. So here, within an occasional letter, there is a hymn. And we're going to look at some of the dynamics that Paul wants us to be aware of from this little hymn. But before we start doing that, I want to make a confession. To this very day, I find myself making lots of little secret bargains with God as a way of seeking, I guess, to manage my anxiety as I navigate a world that often eludes my capacity to make proper sense of it. And I can see now that I was actually a very anxious child. I became really proficient at presenting a face that wasn't scared, even though I was most of the time. But the reality has been that I have lived with a baseline of fear that has had a real impact on my choices and the direction of my life in some respects. And as someone who's struggled with being frightened of the world, I'm both drawn to, and I've got to say a little bit intimidated by, Jesus' apparent freedom from the constraints of fear. I'm not suggesting that Jesus did not experience fear. I'm saying that fear did not contort his decision-making or hinder his response to his Father's call. And interestingly, unlike almost every person before or since, and for all his obvious power and winsome ways that changed the lives of people wherever he went, Jesus never showed concern for his own position or status. He was never moved by fear. Not the fear of missing out, not the fear of making a mistake, not the fear of being wrongly accused, or even the fear of being misunderstood. Jesus never grasped after something from fear that it might be slipping through his fingers. You just don't see that in him, and it's quite remarkable. Particularly when you contrast it with the grasping that's always been everywhere apparent among all people, and particularly leaders. Jesus entrusted himself. Now, entrusting oneself, no matter who you are, is always a somewhat unnerving process, because trust is learnt over time. We generally need to see the outcome of things to learn their meaning, and then we can learn to trust the people who are involved if in fact they've been worthy of trust. Remember the writer to the Hebrews telling us of Jesus, although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. That's in Hebrews 5:8. And I referenced that a few weeks ago at the very start of Lent, when we were talking about how Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness. And you saw in that story that Jesus made decisions and experienced the impact of his choices. And through this process, his faith became a lived entrusting of himself to the Father. Jesus learnt well how to listen well to his Father, with a view to then responding faithfully. This always means an act of entrusting oneself to God who ultimately holds all things, and to trust in that God come what may, no matter what the outcomes turn out to be. The particular idea expressed in the term grasped was designed to remind readers of something. Does it remind you of grasp? Is there a story in the Bible where there's a grasp? I'm thinking of Adam and Eve in the garden. They desired equality with God, and they reached out and took. They grasped the fruit they were warned not to eat. And we're meant to be struck by the direct contrast here. Jesus is almost like a geometric counterpart to Adam. Adam, who was not God, grasped for equality with God, and Jesus, who is God, does not grasp for that equality. And this has some nuance to it, because as you might say, Jesus had no need to grasp for equality with God because he already had the assurance that he was God. But the reverse is even more the case. Jesus knew he was God. How did he hold himself back from demanding that he quite appropriately be regarded by all as God? And in this subtle nexus, I think, is found the very attitude that the ancient hymn Paul is making use of here urges us to participate in. It is this emptying humility. See, as God, Jesus knew what it was to have all power and all authority. In the prologue to John's Gospel, we're told, where John refers to Jesus as the Word, that all things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. That's John chapter 1, verse 3. This is one who fully understands and knows the creative nature of appropriate power and the life-giving effect of order under appropriate authority. This is not about megalomania. It's not about capricious authoritarianism, as we see increasingly today in those who aspire to power and authority in our world. This is power and authority that sets a secure stage for a well-ordered and life-giving creation. This is the power and authority we observe Jesus exercising in his teaching, in his healing, as we read those in the stories of the Gospels. Jesus continually referenced the secure, stable, ordering love of the Father, who, despite the history of unfaithful responses of the people, continues to love unwaveringly in the same faithful manner. It's an ordering that happens in love. Now, this is a decidedly different impression of God that the people of Jesus' day, and indeed most people before and since, frankly, tend to assume. The God of human assumptions tends to be considerably less loving. Either erring on the side of judgmental anger, that's your religious people, they see God a bit more that way, or some kind of detached lack of interest at all in what's going on, that's your non-religious people, they tend to see God that way. Because as we might expect, most of our assumptions about God are kind of extrapolations, for want of a better word, based on dynamics we have experienced in other relationships with various people. And we see it today when people warn us about our terminology around God. The language we use triggers people in particular ways because of their relationships with particular people. Jesus' preferred name for God was Father, Abba, Father. And that's a name that's very difficult for some people in relation to God because their experience of their earthly father has actually been cruel and abusive. And it's hard not to put on to God that which we've experienced already, bearing in mind that even the best human father ever there was in all the world cannot adequately colour the fullness of the glorious love of God. So no matter who we are, we have to engage our imaginations somewhat We build a notion that is a kind of composite of the most loving experiences we have known, and we trust that God is still more loving than we can even imagine. This is the only belief that makes it possible for us to entrust ourselves. Because otherwise our survival instinct will want to protect us from entrusting ourselves to anyone we believe does not have our absolute best interests at heart. Yet, the fruit of this love and the response of faithful entrusting of oneself to divine love is an unprecedented depth and fullness of life. We know this to be true in all our relationships, actually. When we're loved by our parents, for example, and in response we entrust ourselves to them, this is when we're little kids, right? We allow their wisdom and experience and good intent toward us to offer us something we do not have otherwise. The trusting that someone good is keeping a caring eye on us can provide us with the necessary security for us to try things we've never done before. When failure is not rejection or exclusion, but just useful information that enables us to be more informed in our next attempt, we grow and develop in ways we simply cannot if that gracious love is absent from us. When my daughter Wei came into our family at the tender age of 6 months old, we loved her and held her close. We worked deliberately on forming a bond that we'd missed the opportunity to form more naturally because she was not born into our family. We did a better than average job, I've got to tell you. But because we were somewhat behind the usual timing of things, the development of trust and so forth, Wei initially found it near impossible to feel secure except when she had Joe or me in her line of sight. She needed to and you'd see her playing and she'd just be checking where we were. We attempted daycare many times over a number of years at different venues, and she was fine. She loved playing there as long as we were there within line of sight. As soon as we disappeared, she was inconsolable. She would stand at the gate, little hands wrapped around the bars, screaming. It was awful, and we would hide, looking around so that she couldn't, hoping that she would, come to terms, and it never improved. She never got there, and we were never able to leave her at daycare. I did almost exactly the same number of hours of daycare as my daughter. And as she approached the age of 5 and school beckoned, we didn't know what we were going to do. And we heard of this tiny independent parent-run school nearby. 1 teacher, 12 kids, kindy through to year 6. And the teacher was extraordinary. She made it like a little family, a learning family. I don't know why this moves me so much, but yes, I do. When Wei had her first trial day and Joe went with her and got her settled in the school, and the teacher was so kind and attentive, Wei soon felt comfortable. Mum said to her, "It's okay if I go and get a cup of coffee?" She went, "Yeah, off you go." So off Joe went, came back several hours later. Wei was completely ensconced, didn't want to leave. She was happy, she felt safe. She knew that she was loved. She was engaged in fun and exciting activities. That was a little school, and then when it came to going to the big school in high school, the next major transition from fewer than 20 kids to like hundreds and hundreds of kids, we weren't sure how that would go. This time I was going with Wei to the special orientation for students who were the only ones coming from their particular school. And I remember sitting in the... Sorry, I don't mean to be upset by this, but that's a dad thing. Sitting in the Balmain school library, and there's these handful of kids there with their parents, waiting for something to happen. And Wei quietly turns to me, "I'm okay, Dad. You can go now if you want." I cried when I left that school, Ben. She'd learnt to entrust herself. She was okay. She knew she was loved. It was all right. Genuine love and the entrusting of oneself to that love brings new possibilities, new opportunities and adventures, new life. For his time on earth as son of Joseph and Mary, a carpenter who learnt his father's trade, Jesus appeared for most of the time to be nothing out of the ordinary. Already the Messiah, yes, but hidden from view for the first about 30 years of his life. And then at the age of 30, again, out of the blue, Jesus began preaching and healing and teaching. Crowds flocked to him, not merely for the miraculous healings he appeared to perform, but for the deeply resonant truth he proclaimed. After a few short years, that movement built to a crescendo. Speculation swirled that Jesus might actually be the promised Messiah, and that ultimately led to his public execution. And just like that, Jesus was gone. Gone, but not gone, strangely. Certainly not forgotten. Over the subsequent 2,000 years since that time, there is no single person who has had so much impact on world history. Jesus has shown more life-altering, history-shaping power since his resurrection than he could possibly have done in the 30 or so short years of his life or the few years of his earthly ministry. And at this point in history, as it seems as though Jesus might once again have disappeared from the consciousness of our culture, hidden from our awareness, as it were, only a fool or a person who doesn't understand and never studied history could possibly believe that this is the conclusion of the Jesus story. For Jesus and his followers, death is always simply the necessary precursor to resurrection. Something yet more fulsome is afoot. Jesus himself knew this so well, he trusted in the transformational power of the love and truth of God to such an overwhelming extent, he never felt the need to engineer a particular outcome. Jesus felt no need to insist on others honouring him. He knew that they would all come to honour him in due course, when it would not be possible any longer to resist what is true. But it was not his task to force that to happen. Becoming open to truth or love is a process that can never be successfully forced. As soon as force is applied, the inner reaction is to either collapse before it or to resist it. Force is not an invitation to which we freely respond, and neither does it bring about a heart transformation. We either submit or we resist. It doesn't change us. But when we awaken to the true nature of who is this Christ and how much he loves us, and we choose to join in the way to which he calls us, then our heart can both be engaged and transformed. It is the very nature of Jesus' rule that assures his ultimate triumph. See, oppressive rulers, those who rise and maintain their power by force, rely on maintaining more strength that is greater than the resistance to their strength. But as soon as they show any signs of weakening, the seeds of their demise will begin to send up shoots, and their destruction and their place in ignominy is assured. By contrast, the eternal King, whose rule is powered by his self-giving love, awaits the pivot wherein those who strain to hold their awareness away from the truth and love of God lose their strength and they give up their resistance and they come to know. See, oppression dies. Truth and love live eternally. When we are hurt by oppression or coercion or manipulation, the healthy option means becoming free from the impacts of these destructive forces. But when we're nurtured in love and truth, this life-giving power grows within us. We do not seek to escape it. We seek to participate in it, become steeped in it, and to share the same love and truth with the world. My parents have been dead for years. My dad died 11 years ago, Mum 3 years ago, and anything in their parenting that I found damaging, I've done the work to be released from. I don't want to be bothered with that anymore. Deeper understanding, forgiveness, release, it's there for us. However, all that they offered me that was loving and true lives in me today, and I draw on it, and I bless my own children with it. Love and truth are eternal. All else fades away, but these never die. St. Paul draws our attention to this hymn because it offers a succinct expression of entrusting oneself to God and what it means to follow Jesus in doing that. Of all the attitudes we see Jesus displayed in Jesus, this powerfully empowering humility might just be the most challenging one for us to follow. But the reward is not humility for humility's sake. It's not merely obedience for obedience sake. Rather, it is a fulsome liberation that sets us free to enter deeply into a kind of relating that is the fullness of life as we offer life to one another. The reward is in the doing of it. We become a bit more like Jesus, and his glory is seen a bit more through us, and it is magnified through us, and we bring glory to God. So let's do that then. Amen.